the Finance Committee meeting to order. This is Sarah Melish, the chair. I have with me Mike Pratt, Tom Parkins, Peter Twining, Roy Creighton, Andy Olderman, guest Chuck Dam, and Town Administrator Greg Fettersmith. The first item on the agenda is to review the facilities report. And I believe that Greg sent us an email at 4:34 p.m. I think. I don't know if people saw it. With some ideas on facilities. I wanted our input. So have people had an opportunity to review the facilities plan?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Any overall impressions?
Up there.
Up there, yeah.
I guess,
We do have a presentation if you want us to go through it. It's up to you.
We'll take initial impressions, then we'll do the
Yes, no, that's
presentation.
fine.
I guess my, kind of was trying to break it up into chunks. And, you know, one of the chunks is, stuff that are resources of the town, like this one, plan, and the encroaching floods, levels, and, so that to me was, top of the list, something that we had to proactively plan. Big money expense, a lot of planning, and assuming permitting. That will take to, an ultimate resolution. And the next behind that were some important town services, you know, police and fire, both exposed to the same kind of flood levels, and needing to really think about you know, planning for that. Talk about police, we sort of talked about fire department, but not as intensely. One of the things that struck me is in writing about was not just, you know, rising, you know, tide levels, but also heavy rainfalls. Experienced that endlessly, you know, this past summer. So it seems to be the new normal. So that's good. And then other stuff, you know, beyond that is kind of, you know, important, but lower tier, you know, the DPW becomes important for, you know, obviously operational concerns, but also like interest there in terms of what we're required.
I thought the report was really good. It's very comprehensive. Skimmed through it, but I think we need more time to digest it. I think it's good because it hits on, I think, the critical issues, fire location, police location, particularly DPW location. And as Andy said, what are the shufflings of those things going around? First glance through, I did feel it seemed a little biased and that perhaps some voices may have been heard louder than others. I thought there was very little said about the beach house at Singing Beach, and that's a pretty critical part of our infrastructure. And it just was sort of, it's there, it's fine, don't worry about it. But I think more attention needs to be on that. Some of you know, I'm not a big fan of creating a maritime facility at Reed Park. And I feel like if we're trying to move back from the ocean and we're trying to harden against sea level rise and things like that, why are we building into the harbor? Don't think that's a great idea, but otherwise I thought the report was really good, and it gets into a lot of specifics. I thought the identification of parcels of land and things that could be used was really good. So look forward to spending more time.
Peter?
I guess my reaction was what was left out. It's a little bit of a corollary to
I do.
Sorry, I'm late.
a little bit of corollary to Maury's comments in terms of facilities that were not covered. whether that's Singing Beach, whether that's the Charterhouse or that's exactly did a good job in terms of the major town departments, but I wondered about things that were not said, or not. I'd like to spend some time thinking about those facilities also.
Well, my comments are pretty much what Maury said. The same thing, I scanned it like a long time to go through. I kind of echo the same comment about the.
Mike,
I didn't really have a chance, but I guess I'm sure the report maybe identifies or prioritizes, but is it fair to say like the top two is like wastewater treatment and PFAS? Or, no?
that's not really okay. I don't.
There's no ranking, it's just kind of like, here's everything.
No, I'll get into it in the presentation a little bit more, but I'd say it's not so much a ranking, it's this is how we do it over the next 10 years. And there's reasons why, wastewater plant is in year 1, but also in year 7. And then there's, other things have to go in a certain order. And so we're trying to hit both the priority, but the order, because the order becomes important. We can't just relocate. We can't just relocate the police because they need a new facility. We need to find a spot for it. And the way we find a spot for it within the report is moving it.
I guess
Moving
just
other things first.
coming at the comments that I've heard, when I think of what's the building on the dock?
Harbor Masters.
Harbor Master, when I think of that versus wastewater treatment plant, like they're not even in the same ballpark, right? Wastewater treatment plant, I think we all have some video in our brain of like, if that goes bad, like it's bad, right? And same with PFAS, right? Like, I don't think anybody wants to be drinking more chemicals in it. But my opinion, a lot of the other things, they just don't feel anywhere near as important to me as those two things. And I think we do have to, whatever verb you want to use, prioritize, rank, right? Because we don't have 100 million in cash in the bank, right? So kind of gotta prioritize, right? So
Oh, I got the. Got the.
wrong. I'm trying to do guests, is there a better one?
Oh, I do the regular one, not best.
Okay.
Yeah, do the one that needs a password.
Okay, all right.
Here's the password.
Oh, it's Manchester.
Yeah.
So give me the chance to. We're passing notes and.
Okay, do we want to go ahead with the presentation? Once we fix our technical glitches.
It'll be myself, here, clicking the.
Oh. Yeah.
Ashamed if I mistyped that password. So I don't think it's that.
Did you get it?
It says verifying connect. I did the Manchester, I'm not the guest.
Well, that's my problem. I memorized it, but I hope I memorized it right, because I don't have a piece of paper that is written down. Yeah.
Ready?
Yeah, it is what it is.
Yep.
So thanks for the comments so far. I think I can speak to a few of them through the course of this presentation, but I will say, this is a draft that we gave to the select board last week. We're expecting, we took comments from them that we're incorporating into this. I think a little bit different than the comments I just heard were that, they wanted a little bit more level of detail within the report. We think it is pretty detailed, so some things we, had to keep high level, some things we can get into some more details. So, keep that in mind as you guys are following, reading through. But I think, for the purposes of presentation, this is just a few slides that kind of go in, the high points, but I'll try and delve into some of the things I just heard. So, initially, this started about 6-7 months ago. The scope was to, come up with a facility plan for the town, master facility plan. We wanted to inventory all the existing town-owned properties. We wanted to inventory a limited number of private properties that we thought would, potential, work for some of the facilities that the town has. We wanted to prepare the concepts and redevelop all the parcels that we have, because we came very shortly, we realized that, there's not a lot of town-owned parcels. So we don't want to necessarily get rid of them, or, otherwise, limit ourselves a bit more in the future. And then, as you'll see, we have planning level costs, and we also, obviously submitted this report, so. So high level, that's pretty standard, I think, facility master plan. We had a consultant, Tetra Tech, that looked at this. We've done work with them in the past, so they've to date already done the siting analysis for DPW, which looked at a couple parcels within this report prior to the report, kind of went a little bit ahead. They've also looked at the Marine Center or Maritime Center that you guys just were referring to. They've also looked at the library, so they kind of been aware of that. They're doing the $100 million upgrade in Gloucester on their wastewater facility, so they know wastewater facilities. And they're just generally kind of, I'd say, a little bit bigger, but not the biggest engineering firm, that we deal with in town individually. So they went and looked at all these places. They talked to the department heads, various different stakeholders. We went to Concom, we went to the MECT, some of the those entities. I guess what I just heard was they kind of looked at only the big things. We did look at everything. The big things kind of popped out right away. I mean, we know, but having an independent firm kind of look at it, it's like, oh well, your DPW, your fire department, your police, your eventually your town hall, wastewater. Those are the big ticket items. So obviously they need to spend the bulk of the time on those. I wouldn't say we didn't think about the other ones. It's just, as you'll see, kind of when we get into the plan, we didn't want to get too detailed on everything, but we acknowledge that most facilities in town will need some amount of maybe not replacement, but rehab or just continued maintenance. So it did kind of delve into like there's some big ticket items that we need to address, and that needs to be in the plan. And then there's some other things that you guys will also keep in mind over the years, which is kind of what we do already. The big kind of distinction, I think, so just starting with public works, something near and dear to my heart, so it's easy for me to talk about, but and like I mentioned, they already did the siting analysis between our current facility and potentially moving to School Street. So this is just kind of the big ticket things is, the facility is already 50+ years old. It's a CMU building that's out of date. It's not how you would do something now, and there's no ability to renovate that place in situ without, it's gonna be just as costly as a new place, but also how do we still plow the roads? How do we still maintain all of our other operations while we're occupying that site with a contractor for 12 to 14 months? So that's kind of the big takeaways on that one. And so that led us to really evaluating the potential of moving the site, which by having School Street site become available, the compost is now moving to the transfer station. Obviously, that's the kind of natural place to relocate a DPW. So
What's the timing on that, the compost to the transfer station?
So the compost facility will be bringing food scraps to that facility this fall. So the current schedule is probably late October and early November.
How long does it take them to clear out the stuff that's on the site?
So we're basically giving them the winter. So there'll be no food scraps being dropped off there anymore. The stuff that's there will finish curing over the winter, early spring when they're selling off their material anyway to farmers and gardeners and whoever else. They'll take that stuff off site. So we're kind of giving them that window to get that out.
So by April, May of next year,
This is current kind of.
it will look like a dirt lot as opposed to what it looks like now?
Without the muck.
Now, one thing they mentioned in the report was the objectionable grade. That might need mitigation. Do they know what
how they're gonna do that.
Yeah, so keep in mind, this is a facility master plan. We haven't done the engineering yet. We don't even have a full survey, so that's something that will be in our, FY 25 kind of budget, but the idea, there's potential to go have an egress out onto Kit Glass, so the road behind it. We haven't dove too far into, do we need to take down the hill at some, we have done in the siting analysis, and I can forward that around to you guys after this meeting, but being able to get it to a manageable grade, so the road continues further into the site instead of where it turns abruptly to the right.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of make that grade work, but
Okay.
I haven't put a scale on it.
When I read this report, I didn't see that it was definitive that it had to go to a new location. And I'm wondering if the select board has made a decision that it's going to a new location or not, because it seems that before we can put any money into it, we need that determination definitively made.
So we've, like I said, this is the facility master plan. We've already done the siting analysis. And I'll forward that around after this meeting, but the siting analysis is pretty conclusive that the
I'm not arguing that, Dan. What I am arguing is the select board needs to take a vote.
that's fine.
They haven't taken formal.
I think it's should be pretty firm at this point that any new facility, whether it's renovation or a new facility, out of the box, have to move. Now,
That's
that
not what
hasn't-
this report said. It said you could rebuild on site.
Yeah, but I guess
That's,
you wouldn't spend more money and cause yourself more aggravation and not have any follow-up plan.
that's all I'm saying is this report was not definitive and therefore the select board needs to take a vote before we would want to spend any money. It's
Sure.
kind of where I'm coming from.
What's the negative for rebuilding at current location, other than you just gotta manage the activity of trucks and.
Because the alternatives, so the school street, like I said, this is the first domino to fall. If we do not vacate that site, then that site becomes a DPW forever, which is fine with me. But then police or fire or the next thing would have to move to School Street presumably, or you'd have to renovate those in place, which are not ideal spots because of the climate change aspects of that. So there's just no way to get all town facilities to a current standard, current state or forward-looking next 50-year state without moving.
So I lost you. Just what's the negative of, I get, you don't wanna renovate something that's costs more to renovate than to rebuild, I get that. But what's the negative of just tearing down and rebuilding at the current location, other than you mentioned, obviously, the volume of trucks going in it, right? Cause you'd have your DPW trucks there as well as.
I mean, I think you just said that. The obvious things are that if we build the DPW where it currently is, we have the MOPO issues and the renovation issues. But then that site is a better site for police and fire going forward than the alternative School Street site or the alternative sites that exist right now for police and fire. So you have to look at the town-wide availability of parcels, which is further down in the presentation, but that's how we got there.
The notion is that ultimately, police and fire are at risk in their current locations, they have to move. They ideally, what I understand, want to be in a central location townwide. And so therefore not out near the limited commercial district, School Street. And so that's what makes the DPW site, more attractive for that use. And so that's why it becomes this kind of precedent project.
Maybe we put a pin in that and we can get back to it at the end, but I'll get through the next few slides and maybe it'll help clear that picture. And so these are kind of existing conditions, but reasons why we wanted to change the locations in the final plan. But so as you know, the town hall facility itself is 40+ years old. It includes the police department, which is about 4,500 square feet, but typical current standards for other similar sized communities and all those things are around 7,000. There was some question from the select board, does it really need to be 7,000? What are kind of the guiding principles there, which we're going to incorporate those. There are accreditation issues. I think getting into those kind of smaller bullets there. The issue with the police, first and foremost, is it already has access issues during high storm events, which is one you're relying on your police and fire. So access to the building, their garage walkout, all the important mechanicals of the town hall itself are in the basement level, so those are gonna need to be relocated eventually. Then we have the issues with their, the police are occupying that base level, so with their locker rooms, with their evidence room, with their jail cells, like all those things are not supposed to be in the floodplain, and that's where they are right now, so. There is, I guess, some debate whether you would want to renovate all of town, reimagine town hall as just a police station, so those things can come out of the basement. But that's not the direction we went with this facility, because as you see, there's no other place for a town hall. And then you still have that issue of the, retreat from sea level rise, test storms. So those are kind of a recurring theme throughout the report, throughout the presentation, but something that I took away from this, and this was dovetailed in with the coastal vulnerability assessment plan that we did, simultaneously with this, is that 75% of town-owned assets are within the, 10 to 20 year, basically underwater, or, more, as you'll see, there's the percentage basis here of, the percentage is only going up over time, it's not going down. And so, what's the acceptable level of risk for leaving those facilities where they are? That's what this plan is trying to mitigate, ultimately. So I think that touches on all those things. So again, just led to, reimagine at a new location. Go to the next slide. Again, I guess I won't, double down on this too much, but, fire department, really the same story. Mechanicals, occupied areas are in the flood, like you just can't, that can't be. We did look at there is a plan actually that was done several years ago about reimagining the space that they have and, trying to accommodate more things on the first level. But again, you have that issue of how do you fully renovate a fire department and still maintain fire services? So like, it's just it's a recurring theme. It's hard to do. It's not that it can't be done, but it will cost you more money and be more, maintenance of plant operations, we call it MOPO, issues, if you do it that way. And we think we've come up with a plan that addresses those issues. And, at the end of the day, the fire department site would be something else, whether it's a COA in the future, or some, you sell it, or it's housing, or things that are beyond, my control and, the scope of this facility plan is what we would anticipate would happen at the fire department.
Like I said before, I didn't have a chance really to get into the report that deeply, scanned it. But it appeared to me they kind of had two kind of approaches to the analysis. One was the old analysis, which I wasn't privy to, still new here. And the new analysis, they kind of contradicted each other.
So yeah, that's a good point. And so we did, when we have the full plan, so we gave you the PDF of kind of the text of the new stuff, if you will, but you'll see appendix A or B is all of these old plans, and this is going back like 20 years. So over the course of that 20 years, there have been several plans at individual facilities, but there hasn't been a master. And so we did acknowledge that there was prior work done for all these things. So that's where the renovation plans for the fire department, but also, we've had just in our general maintenance since we took on facilities, since me and Nate have been here. We had a company come in and just basically look at all of the mechanicals, all of the HVAC equipment, all of those other periphery things, paint, roof, and just kind of give us a cost level analysis of what is the maintenance has to be going forward. And so we tried to incorporate that while looking at this plan, but I don't think they're not supposed to be contradictory necessarily. It's that we acknowledge that there's good information there, and we have to make a master plan now, not an individual facility plan per facility. So we're trying to look at it holistically.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is there seems to be a conflict. One part of the report is saying it should be relocated. The other part of the report is saying, it would be sufficient just to renovate. And so I'm kind of trying to figure out how you reconcile that conflict.
Yeah, I mean, I'll have to look kind of specific. If you can give me comments, I'd like to take a look at that. So I don't think our intention was.
I just scanned it, so
Yeah.
if I'm wrong.
No, you're right. This report did not definitively say whether you should replace or renovate.
That's.
It showed both options.
So I think it did. I think the layout of the report is more, the existing condition and the projected condition, and these other reports that are there to give us sort of a framework or groundwork for what that facility wants to be at its maximum potential. But then the plan itself and the recommended plan is very clear that, you know, this is our plan for thing, and you know, I'm not the dictator that gets to say we're doing my plan, I'm just saying,
Yeah,
this is the facility plan that we came up with, looking at all of that information. And I think the recommended plan is very clear that the new facilities, you know, the benefits outweigh the negatives in that sense. But we didn't want to throw away that, and there is, you know, like I said, these plans, some of them are 20 plus years old, and they haven't been active. And so this is, you know, if you don't like my plan, or, you know, we want to reimagine this plan, that may be what we end up doing in the long run, but you know, there are millions of dollars of renovations that need to be made in that case, and then that will become de facto, you know, the plan going forward. And so I think it's important. We didn't want to cast away that information, because, you know, if we don't act on the, you know, bottom line $100 million plan, then, you know, I can't help that, and I understand why that wouldn't happen. But it's hard for me to sit here and say that I agree that we should spend $10 million of renovations on the fire department, you know, going forward. Like, that's not where we're coming from.
Do we know what the impact is regarding the potential flooding on the fire station when the culvert and that little retaining place, the little pond is rebuilt? Because I thought that was adding,
Lessen,
yeah, that's what I thought, okay,
lessen the threat.
Yeah.
It doesn't limit.
okay.
Well, and so it's mostly beneficial in terms of the riverine flooding, so the sawmill, it's less helpful in the, you know, sea level rise, hurricane, you know, storm surge scenario. So we couldn't do both. And not. I
Or
should
even
say,
if
we couldn't do both, as in, like, just, we did what we could for the culvert, for the crossing. But that only, you know, when you look at the math, the science behind it, it's only really benefiting us mostly, you know, in terms of the 25-year control, 50-year control, 100-year control that you're looking at. We're only seeing an uptick in the riverine flooding on the 25-year basis, not the 100-year flood or 100-year storm surge. That's a whole different presentation. We've done a lot of homework.
So it did lessen the threat of those smaller storms, but it doesn't eliminate the threat, and it doesn't impact the big storms.
And when will that work be done?
Hopefully within a couple of years.
Is that tied to the bridge?
Yes,
It is.
yes, that's all.
Yeah,
One big project.
that's what I thought of.
Yeah.
Okay. So within 1 or 2 years, you assume that's done, then at least there's this mitigating thing for the fire station.
Right, and the threat really is that basement level. So the mechanicals are there, so the mechanicals should be brought up out of the stay there. The space is not essential to operations in terms of that basement space. They would obviously they would have to think about replicating some of that space on a mezzanine or some sort of a second floor above the main floor.
That's also assuming you never get any more equipment.
Correct. Correct, it is maxed out for a vehicle, so
Although,
you would lose that. There isn't, so the basement does have.
As a bay,
It does have a big one, it's a small one, but it
Yeah.
houses the paper truck, the forestry truck. Traditionally has been housed in the rescue boat.
Yeah, I mean, and so we laid out like kind of the needs that you would have if you were to rent. So, you know, again, that's the plans that have been done before, you know, other kind of thought processes that went into that facility. But there are limitations. And, you know, there's only so much space. The garage bays on the upstairs, the safe ones, are next to the administration stuff, so there's no separation of those things. So all these things that are kind of code related issues or, you know, legacy issues that you would never do it that way. Theoretically, if you're doing a major upgrade, would have to be corrected. That's where you get into compounding issues, and you know, just to kind of spell it out, there's no female facilities on that site. Their overnight facilities are you know, not accommodating their full numbers, stuff like that.
But just to clear out, because so the culvert project is going to help mitigate issues related to the Sawney Brook and the water events that happen from that direction. They don't have any benefit for the rising tide.
Correct, they're not mitigating and they're not making us more resilient towards the storm surge from the ocean.
It's basically where we're getting a little bit more capacity through the culvert, so stuff can get out. But when the harbor is full or storm surge is coming up, it's going that way too. Yeah, and there's just there's no stopping. Like that's the nature of where we are.
So it was always gonna overtop the road and come barrel through. You never stop that unless you build, the major storm gate.
That's the part that's so hard is like, okay, you can build some retaining walls to keep 90% of the flooding out. But the design is over the roadway of Central Street, so it's like. At what point, so
Storm Gate wouldn't do anything?
it was a big eye opener.
Storm gate either at the railroad crossing or out at the yacht club. Yes.
No, but not one over here at Central Street.
No, because it was just over top. Once it's entered into the inner harbor, it's gonna go.
I would think the drawbridge idea is a little bit too close to soften the book too. It's a big flood.
And keep in mind, if the closer you are to Central Street or the culvert, whatever you put in front of it, Sawmill Brook's still coming down, so
Right.
that water has to get to the other side.
Exactly, that's what
So,
these.
yeah, so you get the coinciding, 100-year rain event with a high tide is just a place to go.
So presumably that's cyclical, so you have a high tide that goes for once every 12 hours,
Yeah,
with
so
a
you
rule
get
of 12, so you'd have 2 or 3 hours, you'd have peak tide, you couldn't do anything, but when the tide went out, then you could vent. If you had something at the railroad bridge.
Yeah, I mean, the
Would go out,
railroad
but-
bridge is definitely an option going forward, looking at 50 years, but
Well,
short term. It's not in the scale of this. facility.
The place to do it is really at Atwater Ave, where you can raise that gate to keep everything in storage during the high tide event, during the low tide, flush it out. That's where you really get a power, because that's where it's flat, big storage. But that's.
So just to question, could we get this presentation? And then I also noticed in the back, it referenced appendix A and B, but they were kind of blank.
Yeah, so that's what I was saying. No, so I think it's A is basically all the different studies
Fire
that were,
reports, okay.
we gave them those, so they reviewed those as part of this.
Okay.
They didn't include them in the 6,000 people. They will.
Okay.
And then I forget what B.
B was like properties,
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
parcels the town owns or whatever.
A and B, but A is just figures and tables. It's not all reports.
Oh, because my A and B is blank. but
They're so small.
Or so
you
maybe,
can't- You
yeah,
can't read them.
A and B was reports. A
and
was the maps.
B is
was-
the pictures.
Okay,
We'll get you the full copy, it's just,
Yeah.
for the purposes of
and then,
today.
It's what I said.
It's what we said.
I
I saw-
downloaded it twice.
I saw the.
It's
But
your,
anyway,
it's your.
Maybe it's me.
I got the headers.
I got the headers, but not the body.
They were definitely omitted from the text. It was separate.
The only other thing
It was
was, I
separate.
think the report takes this
separate, I didn't
perspective,
send it.
and I think Chuck, you sort of had leaned on this perspective a little bit, which is the difficulty in coexisting in a place and renovating it. And I guess I would say it would be worth maybe thinking a little higher altitude. These buildings we're talking about are probably gonna be 40 years of lifetime, hopefully more. And so, yeah, more than that. So if you think of 40 years of operation and you're locating something because we have 1 or 2 years of coexisting, I would say, think long-term and do what needs to be done as opposed to making a decision about moving something because for 18 months it's gonna be a house.
Short-term pain, long-term gain.
Exactly.
Well,
And that may not shape anything different than what's here, but I was surprised that they said, don't underestimate the difficulty of operating in space. You know.
And further to that, I mean, we did it with the school, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we built the new school right next to an old school.
But it was a new building.
Right, but I'm just saying, like, I'm not saying it's exact match, but it's not an apples and oranges to
I lived in
suggest
my house for 18 months of renovations. And worked from home.
we had kids and buses and students.
I don't, yeah. I think we've already done this analysis on the DPW. It's more expensive to, so I'm not concerned about that one now. We can look at the potential impacts to fire and police and whether or not they move. You know, I'm not opposed to it. I think that we did look into it. I'll make sure, I think this was a comment we heard from the select board too, was, you know, we need that kind of backup to be, you know, in front of us in this report.
And
not
I
just
I
Something
think,
that Chuck says we did.
I think we need a concrete kind of decision of how the building would be reused if a new one's built. So if the fire department's being moved to a different building, what's gonna happen to that fire department building? We need to look at that too.
I don't think
I
that's-
think it's a little premature. I don't think I can sit here and tell you, because that.
I'm not
because
saying
that-
you can tell, but select board needs to make that decision.
Well, I guess I just wanna say it up front is, you know, these things are all subject to, you know, the board, select board approval, FinCom agreeing with that, you know, when it comes to where we find the money for these things. And also, you know, town meeting. So like, this, at some level, I have to bless this plan from my point of view. I want, like I said to the select board, I want them to buy in and think that this is the right plan. I'm willing to give them the additional information that they're asking for, because I have it, just to write it up that way. And I'm willing to do that for you, but I can't sit here and say that I can have a magic wand, you know, or a crystal ball for 10 years from now when we do relocate the police and fire, because we followed this plan. And say that the best alternative at that point is that building is going to be COA or
Right,
you know,
but-
housing or something like that. Like, that's not my decision.
I'm
It's not
going-
something we
I'm
decide.
going outside the box as a facility study and saying, we're talking about doing something about council on aging soon. If the fire department's gonna be freed up at some point, do we rethink that and say, okay, we can use the fire department as a council on aging?
Yeah,
You know.
I think Sarah's not trying to put it on you and say,
Right.
this is on you to say exactly
It's
what would
outside
happen
the
if.
box.
But Sarah's point is valid in that if we're gonna bless, picking up the fire station, or sorry, knocking it down, building a new one, some other location. Part of that equation has to be, well,
What do we do?
what are you gonna do with that old location?
And so we gave alternatives in here, but like, I can't say that it should be a COA or it should be housing or anything else. But, yeah, so understand, if it's not on me and you're not asking me to do it, you know, for the purposes of this report, or you're buying into this report, from my perspective, then, okay. I'm just saying, like, that's the pitfall I see in that scenario. That's probably why, you know, there's 20 years worth of reports and nothing's been done. And because somebody said, well, we can't possibly spend, you know, $5 million to renovate the fire department without knowing, you know, that we're not gonna move it in 5 years. That, the opposite thing is what happened. Right? So that's how we got to where we are, with 50-plus-year-old facilities that need to be relocated or renovated to tune of $100 million.
I wanna just kind of circle back to the just for a minute. So the notion of if that site is, you know, truly the most attractive site for potential police and fire, then that's a reason to say, okay, keep them go somewhere else. But and I'm not sure if this is what you were saying, Chuck. You know, you got those 2 or 3 buildings that are still on that site. If DPW is gonna remain on that site, I would presume that we could build a new highway garage on available land that's currently on that site without touching the existing highway garage. Finish that project, move the highway garage over, knock down our old highway garage, and, you know, play that kind of shell game.
So this is in the site analysis, so that's what we were looking at, we were deciding, you know, if we renovate or if you keep it on that site. That's not the determination we made, so, you know, we did look at, you know, for that site specifically, and even for the School Street site. The 3 or 4 parcel you see is only the parcel, it's not the building envelope or, you know, the other constraints that the site may have, so that is in the siting analysis, that's not in the facility.
But that parcel on Pleasant Street, I believe, is 6 or 7 acres, is that right?
Yeah, but only like 3 of it's like developed,
Because of.
which is why they didn't get,
Wetland?
Yeah.
Stream, intermittent stream.
yeah.
Still 3 acres.
The whole thing, and it's a big outcrop of lead, which is another recurring theme around town, and everything is ledge
How
or
much of that?
So that's something that we have to determine when we go to the next phase on that site is survey and borings. And that, that's what the geotechnical analysis, but like this is, real dollars that we have to spend going forward. Well, that's where we end up.
I'm just saying, 3 acres is big even compared to the lot size of the fire station, which is probably 0.2 acre,
Oh, for sure.
right?
Yeah, that's why it does lend itself to be either a DPW or shared police, fire, location and stuff like
I
that.
don't know, I'm just building on what Andy said, to me, even 3 acres, it just would seem possible that you could. Play that little game for the whatever year it would take you to build a new one.
Yeah, I mean, we did this analysis for the siting analysis. It's not impossible, but there's trade-offs. We determined, via that study that the preferred alternative, or the cheaper alternative with the most upside is relocation.
So. One thought that kept creeping up with me is how Sweeney Park would be such a great site for town complex. I mean, flat, plenty of room, and nobody really around. But so the thought was, well, rather than spend all this money to fix Sweeney Park where it is, would it be better to consider Winthrop Field or something like that? They can flood in high tide. Okay, we do lose our athletic field, but that's such a prime spot. I
You're
mean,
talking about Winthrop or Masco?
well, no, Winthrop Field out on Summer Street
No,
has
Winthrop's out on
Bridge
Street.
Bridge in Jersey.
that
But
one, right? But anyway, just a thought of, if there is such a need for premium flat site space, maybe we should consider putting the ball fields where it's more flood prone, because
So
that's something that
we did consider that. I forget who we talked to, if it was Steve Gang from the Concom or if we talked to the Lincoln Field Committee, but Winthrop Field is deed restricted. We can't build anything.
No, we can
Facility
build-
wise, we can build fields, but then the problem of, anecdotes that I've heard is that there's no place to park, like you can build parking.
Yeah.
And, the idea of Sweeney is, maybe that's more valid, but there is a open space master plan that doesn't refer to any of that. And then it is restricted by wetlands, so there is a buffer, and which is acceptable for field,
It's
maybe
not
not
sea
a
level.
DPW or something else.
Right.
So, I appreciate the thought. I think we've considered some of those aspects.
Yeah.
And it's more dead end.
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
I'm surprised that there's been no consideration of using the area behind town hall.
so again,
You
that's
just raise
the
it up.
flood,
You just raise it up.
but it becomes an island. It does. You need access. We had no access.
No,
That
that-
goes to the point of the Maritime Center. They're just saying we shouldn't be building stuff that close to the flood. So I mean, it's just, it's not impossible. I
I
agree.
haven't seen Central Street flood,
But you're talking about behind town.
right? You raise up, raise up
Yeah.
a road to get.
But that's just, I guess, into the permitting aspect, like that's just not feasible.
Challenge.
Why?
because the
Because
flood,
building
It's
close
all
to the
asphalt.
ocean or.
Because you're not allowed to raise the grade like that.
Well, all of the town. We just had a house before us in ZBA on Raymond Street, and they're raising it up, the house up to be 14 feet
Yeah,
above
but that
the.
was probably an existing house.
All the houses are,
Not
they're
building a
doing
new-
it with all the houses.
They're not raising the grade.
I think they're putting it on piles. And like enclosing the basement.
They're not
They
building.
are using piles, but you can use piles behind town hall.
We have to access. You can't do this. It's just not, it's not a feasible solution for town owned and operated facilities that we have to design and permit and build. It's just not, it's not the same as private residence.
Sweeney Park.
Yeah, we can put Sweeney Park up there if you want.
Park review for playing sports games,
Well, I mean, and so, this comes to the other thing that, the actual coastal zone, coastal vulnerability assessment plan that we did. Talks about making Masco in the, 30 to 50 year timeframe. a floodable park, not a ball field, or not, you know, these other things,
I can
so,
understand that.
so like
because
that's,
it does
that's exactly what you're doing.
seawater run.
It's still title, same
Right.
thing with this back.
Well, you get, in
It's all
storms,
really
it's,
title.
I mean, there were ducks swimming on it one day.
You know, so like, you know, there's,
So that does, you know, that involves checking.
so I mean, I guess I would just say, we did have these conversations. Just like we're having now, and I'm not saying like anything was inbound, but we went to every, you know, facility, property owner that, you know, would talk to us, MECT, Concom, you know, down the list. And my opening statement to all of them was, there are no good ideas, we're welcoming bad ideas. And so like, I'm not trying to say that this is necessarily the worst idea I've ever heard, I'm saying, we were looking at the bad ideas, like we wanted more ideas, because there are no good ideas. And so this is, I think, the most defensible, forward-looking plan that we could develop. It's not to say that, you know, we couldn't look at Sweden, we couldn't look at the town hall more, but you know, you have to come to a realization that things are feasible and the way you do things, and there are things that are not.
Yeah, I think going into this, Tetra Tech fully expected there to be, you know, multiple different options and scenarios that they could lay out for us. But the more they got into it and the more they realized the number, you know, restrictions that we have, you know, regarding open land and buildable space, it really just narrowed down to this kind of one scenario that we've presented in the report that kind of, you know, requires DPW to move and then a public safety going to Pleasant Street, and just kind of the dominoes following that way.
And so, Greg, if you want to flip through, I mean, we kind of, you know, went through, but you know, we do have mapping that is included in the report that we, you know, had in the presentation if you want to look at it, but
So one comment, I think, just going back to Sarah, I think this report is good. It probably needs, again, some selectmen or others, just overview of, okay, if DPW moves to School Street and public safety moves to Pleasant, and you have a vacant fire building and you have this, what are the uses of that? Because if you're queuing up a process to spend about $100 million and build buildings that are gonna last 40 years, I think you need to look at it like, what are the pieces that are gonna move around? Andy mentioned Tetris earlier, which I think is appropriate analogy here. Where does it go beyond just project 1, project 2, project 3? I don't think it needs a huge amount of work, but I think the voters will want to hear that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's where, at the end of the day, when we're saddled with a whole lot of debt and it's all working, what's it gonna look like at the end, as opposed to a lot of question marks?
so that's part of the presentation.
Yeah.
We want to flip through.
But we'll realize that 15+ years from now, when all of this potentially is done, maybe. I can't tell you what the needs are at the time 15 years from now. I'm not that smart. And the needs will change.
Right.
In intervening 15 years.
Yeah.
We can suggest some ideas for the conversation becomes big. It might become the new town hall because it is better protected from floods than this one.
And then the question is, then what do you do with town hall? I mean, I think that's what we're looking for, is to have a much more in-depth plan of saying, if we follow through with this and we have vacant buildings, this is what's gonna happen, what happened to
You have
them.
the potential of one vacant.
Well, Seaside One's gonna be vacant too, isn't it?
Seaside One is history.
Yeah, so
It's not gonna survive.
we did put that in the plan, but I think Seaside One, if we fall through this plan,
If you want to
Seaside One can
save
relocate
Seaside One, you need to do that.
to
You need to
Pleasant
move.
Street. Like where the police fire network is, the fire.
So you need to relocate it because something else is gonna be there, or we're
It's
anticipating
gonna
water taking it out?
Water's taking it.
So are we really,
So
so for potential reasons, I don't know. Every master plan that I've ever seen is sort of a starting point, and it's logistics, it's thinking about, you know, one move amongst many. Ultimately, when lots of master plans are executed, they're not necessarily executed as originally conceived. There are changes that happen over time, and so I do think it's a valid idea to identify possible uses of existing fire department, for example. But I don't think we get so specific as to, or I wouldn't expect the selectmen to be so specific that they can identify.
And I guess to double down, like we do say in the report and in this presentation that I was given is that, you know, right now the current need beyond the big ticket items is a COA. That could be a COA. The downside is parking. There are other, we know that there are other private parcels that are in the works. If those get, taken up as a COA prior to this being final, I'm fine with saying, COA is off the table. It should be housing, or we can come up with a couple other, A, B, and C alternatives. But like that's a very small token item in a much broader plan. I don't think that's worth bogging down or throwing at the whole plan or even pausing.
I'm not arguing with the plan. I'm trying to go outside of the plan. I'm saying that we crossed our Ts and dotted our Is. So this isn't just isolated projects that we feel we want. For it, I'm not convinced that we need a COA. Personally. And people seem to say it's a really high priority. I'm not convinced of that, and I'm a senior.
Yeah,
I
and so like,
use it.
yeah, and so again, it's not final, it's not etched in stone, but I have to ride the town plan, I think.
I understand no one has a crystal ball and no one knows in 10 years what you're gonna need and all that kind of stuff. But you're advocating the most drastic of all the possibilities here, right?
I don't think that's true.
Well, number one, you could just rehab, right? And I'm not suggesting that's the right answer, because like you don't take a 100-year-old crappy house and throw more money into it than it's right to tear it down and build a new one. But exactly. But let's just be clear, rehabbing is an option, right? Rehabbing is an option. It might make zero fiscal, financial, economic sense, but it is an option. And I'd argue it's the least drastic because nothing moves, you're just fixing things in
I
place.
categorically disagree with that because you're leaving those facilities in the flood. We have a CMAP
How
that
about the
says.
DPW though? What if I'm talking about the DPW?
And I said, we did a siting analysis, so I'm not advocating, I take your point, but I've done it, I've answered the question.
Let me just continue to make my point. There's three buckets here. There's rehabbing, which again, I'm not suggesting makes any sense. It's negative economic sense. Rehab something that's about to fall down.
Okay.
There's, tearing down and rebuilding, but keeping the location, the same. So just rebuild DPW where DPW is rebuilt, with the caveat, like you said, that there's gonna be all this chaos and extra costs because you've gotta run operations at the same time you're rebuilding. But then the third bucket is, to me, the most drastic, where you're picking up things like the little hotels and boardwalk and you're just moving stuff around and it's like, to Sarah's point, like, if you're gonna advocate the most drastic of those three things, you gotta tell me what the last piece of the puzzle is, like, what's.
I think I've answered all three of those questions within the report and to you guys tonight. I just don't follow it.
I thought the answer I heard was like, yeah, there's gonna be one empty lot of land and we don't know, and we'll see.
No,
what we need.
I've said it's a COA. If you don't want it to be a COA because that's not what the voters want or anything else, we could say it's housing. We could say there's no other town need that would belong at that location.
That we know of.
You could sell it and-
We could sell it to a developer to make condos.
Again, like. It's not that I won't put that in the report. I think we have a lot of that in the report. But for the purposes of sitting here tonight, I don't see the relevance.
There's a big difference to me between a COA and, like someone just said, selling it to a developer, right? Because one's gonna bring in a couple $1 million, which actually helps fund some of the things we're talking about. And another one is actually a negative expense, because we're gonna take the empty lot and spend more money to put something there. So those are two very different things.
From where I said, I get a lot of pressure for the COA. I see that happening before it's gonna go down. Before this project goes forward. So in my mind, that building is potentially up for sale. As one option, unless another town need emerges over the next 10 to 15 years.
I guess I think I'm thinking of saying I'll be halfway, like we'll get more information in the report about what it could be. I'm not gonna recommend what it will be, but I will recommend what it could be.
Yep.
And then, but like, that question doesn't need to be answered for 10 years or more. I'm just shaking your head, but like,
I'm talking about that because in my mind, it does need to be answered because it's all part of this, like, there's this master puzzle. And it's like, again, we're picking this up, putting it here, picking this up, putting it here. And then we're like, well, there's gonna be this last piece of land here. And well, it could be a COA, and well, we could sell. And it's like, well, to me, like,
but
that's,
is that really moving the needle on $100 million plan?
you just said how limited land the town owns, right? The town has very limited land.
And it will remain our land until the day that we
So if one of the outcomes is potentially selling it to a private party developer, then like, number one, that's counterintuitive, because we're actually reducing the amount of town land, which I just thought I heard a few minutes ago. Town land is at a premium, but okay,
But that's because
fine.
you pushed me to give you alternatives, and that's the alternative. I said a COA, you didn't like that answer, now you don't like that
Okay,
answer.
Okay,
I'm just saying, I need to know the dollars in these two scenarios, the possibility scenarios. I'm not putting you in a corner and saying it's gotta be this. It's, you know, if it's a COA, there's another, making this up, 4 million out the door. That's what it would cost to build a COA building there. Or it would be 3 million in, because that's what we would get from a developer, or, you know, like, I mean.
I
That's
think,
just tough.
I think the next use is kind of the tail wagging the dog in this.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I think, you know, the kind of the foundation of the report is just recognizing that at some point, the police department, the fire department, and, you know, are not gonna be viable in their current location. It's final. And the current DPW site is regarded as a better location because it's still central to town.
Yeah.
And where we have to do something to DPW already, I would, you know, I'm with you in arguing that, you know, there is a scenario where DPW could remain where it is, undergo some pain for a year, rebuild, but where it is an attractive option for police and fire, then that's a reason to say, okay, we're doing something with DPW anyways, let's look at another spot for it. That doesn't have to be central to town. And then what happens to the fire department, I think is, those are options, you know, those are like secondary things, I guess, in my mind. Not that they don't matter, I'm not saying.
I guess to get where you are then, and I certainly have not read it, so maybe I gotta read it and I gotta understand all the water implications, but you're basically saying there's no choice. Like, if I go down the road you just went down, like,
Except, you know, in the back of my mind, and I don't know if it says this in the report, Chuck, is. Okay, the fire department has a flood risk at the lower level. So can we reimagine the fire department not requiring its lower level and, you know, building a second story?
right, see, that's what I thought I heard.
For all that pain and suffering, you know, and maybe fiscal sense that won't make. But
I think that's in here.
is that, you know, what's that?
Yeah, so I mean, of course, like that was considered, and you know, except we stopped short of documenting every kind of, you know, where every last room or you know piece of a facility will go. I guess that's another point that I should make is that there's, you know, this is a facility master plan. It's not a floor plan per facility, so that's not something that I have. But you know, we are able to, you know, read the prior reports and look at the prior reports and look at the cost estimating that was done then, to look at what's done now, to look at the requirements that there will be going forward, or, you know, reimagining things, like, so we have that information, we've done that exercise. We will definitely be more clear as to those alternatives within this report and potential costs and pitfalls of doing that, but so I'm not worried about that, but I do think that, so I'll leave it at that.
I would like to add one big consideration. When I hear of putting emergency vehicles on Pleasant Street on a regular basis, that kind of concerns me. It's, you know, for emergency vehicles, that road is very narrow. Houses are all right on the street.
It's no worse than, it's better than School
I
Street.
think it is worse than School Street.
No, it isn't. It's wider than School Street.
So, but there may be a way to blast a driveway through to Pine Street. Behind that.
Again, this wasn't looking at
Yeah,
the
but-
development plan. There was
Those
a
are,
cemetery there,
but-
which would be hard.
but siting analysis should like have some caveat.
Well, so to
contingency
be clear, we
for
haven't
those.
done a siting analysis for police and fire, we haven't done it for DPW. So that will be a consideration when we get there,
Yeah.
and, you know, there will have to be gives and takes, but again, it's more advantageous to look at it in those terms than it is to leave them where they are, vulnerable to sea level. But, you know, if you had to choose between having a, you know, response, you know, during a, you know, potential future, you know, 100-year storm, you can't respond from current down facilities. Good from Pleasant Street.
But the ambulance on Pleasant Street is not.
Right, that's
I mean, they're all,
Yeah.
Can we
talk about
the wastewater?
What?
Can we talk about the wastewater?
Yeah, so I mean, I can try and be a little quicker in these next couple, but so, wastewater plant again is, the issue is the potential sea level rise in the future. We've discussed in the past, in my current capital plan, we are looking for a $3 or $4 million upgrade in FY 25 that will do the low lying fruit in terms of flood hardening. That's not gonna flood proof it. If we get the category 3 or something like that, like all bets are off, but we can do better than the current condition. That's what that 3 or 4 million would be, process improvements as well as the flood hardening improvements that we can make.
And that would be the critical kind of mechanicals kind of a move, that's kind of step one.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of critical mechanicals in there, and
I
there's a lot
understand,
of
but that would be
low grade pumping and stuff.
But that allows you to recover the water.
We're losing money.
So that allows us to be more resistant if a larger flood or sea level rise or storm surge comes in and inundates the lower levels, because all of those buildings have lower levels. We don't have to worry about losing the motor controls and stuff like that. Now, if it gets inundated for a long period of time, or there's other variables in that scenario, we could still very well lose things, but this is going to alleviate that problem.
I was talking about the portion of the plant you said has not been operational since you came. It
Oh,
has
you mean
something
that.
to do why you're using so much water.
Oh, no, yes, okay, so yes, that's the plant water system. So that's the,
That
basically
would be
the
in
water
this.
that we make at the plant is not drinking grade water, but it
It can
is
be
water that can be
reused.
used within the
Okay.
process. Right
Okay.
now, we are using potable water in that process. From same water you drink or flush the toilet with or whatever. So we would be rehabilitating that system. There's several, it's, I don't know the exact number, say 50-50, 3 or 4 million, 50-50 of that is flood hardening on one hand, upgrading things that need to be upgraded anyway, but making them more hard. And then the other things are just process improvements. That's where your water system, the clarifier, stuff like that, doesn't matter for flooding, but does matter for the overall workings of the plant.
What's the expected remaining life of the wastewater treatment plant?
So we have a $3 or $4 million upgrade that we anticipate will make it, the next 20 years. So if we were to stay on this site, for perpetuity forever, we will be up for another much more probably than $3 or $4 million upgrade in 20 years.
3 or 4 million buys 20 years. what you're saying.
That buys us the process improvements and the flood hardening. Within the master plan that we're presenting, we are showing a wall in the 7 to 8 year time frame, and that was just a kind of intermediate step. That's not the wall that we need if you look at the post-vulnerability assessment plan, the 2070 scenario, but so now we're talking 40 plus years. We're not solving that problem. With this wall or within this 20-year time.
But like the fence line where the Legion is, you put some kind of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
wall.
that's kind of the intermediate, I forget the number, I think $7-8 million.
But do you spend the money to put the foundation for a wall that ultimately
Yeah.
we want to
So
extend?
that's the give and the take that we're still having and that will develop over the next 4 or 5 years when we go to do that project.
Okay, that's fine.
So
Oh, go ahead.
just a final comment, and so in the 20-year period. That is during the time at which you. Make a determination of really hardening it with a super wall or. Relocate.
Well, I'm just
Exactly.
we just talked about not throwing good money after the bat, right? Like you don't renovate a 100-year-old house if it's gonna be cheaper to build a brand new house. So I just wanna make sure we're not throwing good money after the bat. Is the 3 or 4 million, should you do the 7-8 now? Because you know what I'm trying to like,
I think the
It's a
3 or
different
4 is
project.
different.
So the 3 or 4 million is truly process and hardening. The 7-8 million in the short term is also
so you need both.
for,
Is what
we
you're
need both. And then the longer term that Greg's talking about for the 20+ year solution.
No, that's fine. And you
If we-
need both, it's just a timing thing.
Yeah,
You need this now and you need that.
I'd say if you told me right now, like, we're moving that in 20 years, you have to move it, give me everything you need right now to move it, like, we would still need to do these $4 million projects to get there when it can. be. So definitely not good money. Definitely all of the above.
So this is an old house, but it's stable, good foundation. It just needs a new roof.
Exactly, yeah, it's just replacing all the, the mechanical equipment that has a 20 to 25 year life cycle, which is when the last, major project was done and all those mechanical and electrical equipment was installed.
Let's move on. Town hall.
Yep, so, you know, we've touched on this, but, you know, the idea is that if we follow through with this plan as presented, the moving the police, you know, which does occupy on the second level as well as the basement level, that second level will now become available for other town uses. And so that's where we get into the, you know, we have town facilities that, you know, Seaside One that has planning, Concom, those would then potentially come over to, you know, occupy the space that was now vacated by the police, and that frees up Seaside One, so that's not a, you know, town, you know, occupied asset, so. Say that just generally, you know, that makes sense, right? So. So these are the heat maps, if you want to call them that, flood maps that came out of the coastal vulnerability action plan, CDAP. So there's, you know, the different scenarios on a 30, 50 and 70, you know, 2030, 2050, 2070 time horizons. So this is consistent with how, you know, state and federal, you know, folks are looking at sea level rise and climate change. So, you know, the different colors there are, you know, the different potential impacts.
Can you just run me through the colors for a sec? So purple is most critical.
I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that because I don't have it committed to memory.
So my takeaway was, the closer the color is to the existing water, the higher the percentage of.
Okay, so it's just
of flooding.
Yeah, it's
a
a
logical.
Yeah, so like in the 2070, I mean, you could, it doesn't take, you know, doesn't matter what the color is, but, you know, sea level rise will be worse in 2070. So that kind of outer ring of colors is already inundated in the 2070.
So like that 2070 shows a significant number of buildings like underwater, I guess.
Correct.
I assume so.
That's
What
why you
are
can see the
those?
colored-
Is that
That's wastewater treatment, that's where the little.
the Legion?
Yeah, that's a parking lot.
You can make out the circular clarifiers, that's the truth. Like, so you can kind of see the straight line going across is the or you kind of up left to right is the tracks. They're kind of
Yes.
Yeah.
on a berm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So right behind the tracks are the clarifiers, and then you can work your way around town hall. So Sarah, that just showing the town hall parking lot is officially, you know, underwater in 2070. Based on this modeling, which is the accepted state, you know, modeling.
So we'll have a different number of water customers then. Because Taffy Street and a lot of.
This just explains the color.
So this actually explains it, but, you know, I think it's intuitive, but, you know, the 0.1% chance is, you know, equivalent to 1,000-year flood down to the. So that's not.
So the darker the color, the
Yeah,
worse, the
exactly.
worse the flood,
And-
basically.
and the sewer-
More frequent,
water,
more
more
frequent.
water.
Blue is worse than purple.
So this is showing over the course of those times, you know, which town assets are essentially underwater. So Seaside One, 100% across the board by 2030. And that's not to say it's underwater 100% of the time. That's to say when we get the 1-year storm, it's underwater.
Well, I'm just curious, why is library dry and yet
Because
Town hall
believe it or not,
keeps
based on the modeling and the elevations, the library is just out of.
Just out of that zone.
And this was also, I
the
should mention,
elevation can't be that different?
no, this is actually,
That's what I'm saying,
And
because
it-
you just filled up the rest.
it's also,
Design.
this modeling and this mapping was based on critical elevation. So that's like the lowest point of entry for the floodwaters as they come up.
Right.
And so at town hall, that's a lower threshold because we have the at-grade garage
Right.
is getting flooded. Whereas the library, you know, to get to that threshold of that first floor door or the basement window is a much higher level than that number.
I mean, yeah, Seaside One is actually higher than the town hall police garage, I
The
think,
garages.
yeah. So, yeah.
So I don't know how much time you want to spend on this, but.
Yeah, so I mean, again, we did look at a lot of properties in town. This map is showing all, you know, kind of town-owned parcels, although I will say the stuff in yellow is town-owned, but the stuff in green, I think was the MECT properties. And then, you know, based on the zoning and based on the conservation restrictions, if you go to the next map, Greg, you know, keep going. So, yeah, so you can see all of those grayed out ones had some other problem with it, whether it's the conservation restriction or the you know, no access, like there's no road to some of the, you know, they're landlocked. So, you know, we had to eliminate those because it's just not feasible to present a plan that is showing, you know, building $10 million road to get to a parcel that, isn't in a wetland or, inundated in storms, whatever the case may be.
What's the big yellow on the top? That's the current compost?
That's the current landfill.
Yeah, we got compost at the
So that's the potential School Street site, and I forget what the red was, the town owns it, but there was something else on the site that.
Cell phone.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Cell phone.
Yeah.
So like, we still own the site, but there's something else occupied.
Yeah, it's occupied.
Big cell tower.
Would the landfill be considered a facility? So is that something we should keep in as a town on?
I mean, so there's no potential to develop it any more than we already have.
No, but
There's
to
no-
maintain the
Well,
cover and.
there's no continued
liner.
maintenance in the sense of a facility, we have continued monitoring, which is already in the budget.
Okay,
Um,
so it doesn't
we
really
do
belong.
semi-annual monitoring, reports and sampling and submitting all that stuff to DEP. So that'll continue in perpetuity until DEP says.
It seems like it's similar to some of the other stuff.
And so Greg, you can
Keep moving,
click through
keep
these
moving.
real quick, but so essentially the blue sites, based on the plan that we've identified and laid out here. The upper blue on the other side, 120, that's obviously the new DPW site, so we show the current DPW site, Greg, if you click to the next one. And, so we're showing kind of the over time as these projects are approved and further vetted and laid out and site analysis completed. This is kind of how we see this unfold. So that's the first shoe to drop is DPW moves up to there, public safety moves and occupies the current DPW. Town hall gets renovated now because the police and fire are gone, or police and from town hall. So these are the big ticket items that are laid out. Certainly, they're not trying to say we're ignoring it by any means, but the Singing Beach bathhouse, the Seaside One, like the Chowder House, like these facilities just don't compare in the magnitude. So it's just not something that we spent a lot of time identifying. Nate and I are separately, outside of the scope of this facility master plan, are developing the 20 to 25-year capital plan that will show the continued maintenance of the Chowder House. We're just doing the roof this week. So, that roof won't show itself in the next 20 to 25 years on any sort of thing. The bathhouse is a little bit, I take that point. We do need to spend a little bit more time on that, maybe.
Could use some enhancements.
Yep. And so again, so that's
You should
that's a fair comment that we'll try and
could
address in the
consider
final.
making it year round.
And then, so just for the purposes of illustration, we showed the fire department turning to a council on aging. Because that, at this point in time, with the information we have and the development of this plan, that's the most likely town need at the time that this is, going to be developed. Certainly, there's private entities and whatnot that are angling for COA, and Greg said there's other people that talk to him, so we couldn't go through every kind of last scenario of where COA will end up. But again, it's much smaller in this scheme of this master plan than anything else. We do keep on the books there. The library does have a need for renovation. I think you guys have discussed that
Design
length
for
about the,
renovation.
the idea that they have money that they haven't spent, and that's kind of more of a paralysis by analysis type deal. So again, it's hard for us to gauge where that will be in the long term, but we acknowledge it. And then the treatment plant, long term, I think that it does need to move. But I can't tell you 20 years from now, it will be moving. We'll get into every bullet here. It's stuff that we've already talked about, but it lays out in words. And it does show on the bottom there, that there are these other ancillary buildings, facilities that we do acknowledge, and we will keep in our long-term capital planning, but it didn't kind of it's a rounding error on these other projects.
What's the home station? What's the last?
So that's one that actually came up at one of our last meetings. So that's the one by the school.
Oh,
It was a
oh,
former DPW facility.
Yes.
I actually did get from Sarah, not Sarah, no, Sarah Creighton, the consent order that was filed by when the school project was going on. Essentially, there can be no storage or of, gas and, those types of things. They had an issue even with the sewer connection there, so the sewer has been cut in caps. And I don't see any of those things. We only use it right now as cold storage. I just think in the long term, when we develop a new DPW and a new police and fire, anything that's cold storage there gets moved to those facilities because they're now going to with their department that they belong. We actually have another outbuilding at Rosedale Cemetery, the cemetery equipment there, that would be relocated. And so we would, those types of things would be either removed completely or given to the school in this case, or something else. But again, that's not something I can determine for the purposes of this plan, but certainly if we fall through with steps 1, 2, and 3, when we get to step 5, this is part of it.
That building is, because of the Lincoln Street well,
Exactly.
it's a downside, but if you ever needed a facility to clean water or do something, it would be great to use that. You've already got walls and a roof.
Yeah, so
And it's historic, it looks good, it fits.
yeah, so we did actually look at it for the PFAS when we were only thinking that we had Lincoln Street well as a remediation site. We did look at it for containing those vessels and doing that. There actually, we don't have the headspace. So it's not, if you get it in the building, there are certain mezzanine levels and stuff like that, schools with their height. So it doesn't lend itself to that. And I guess I should say, we didn't touch on PFAS, but it is included in the plan, but that's in my mind, a totally separate track. It's accounted for in dollar terms in this facility master plan, because we are gonna have to address and it's a big ticket item for sure, the PFAS issue. We've talked about that at previous meetings and capital planning. The numbers that are coming out of those studies are included here, but we didn't spend, it's not technically a new facility, it's renovating these other ones, and there's many more considerations that we have to take into account for a public water supplier than a DPW or a police fire or town hall. So it's on our mind. It is talked about in the report, but the level of detail is much greater in separate. So that 100 million figure does include the PFAS sewage.
So are we good with this?
So this is the, I guess, 8-year plan, but of course, we understand that, this might be a 10-year plan, might be a 15-year plan, but we have to put something down that makes sense and is defensible and shows the kind of connection between each individual project. So, I think we are trying to look at each site individually, but also holistically. And that's why maybe there's some back and forth and question on some of these things, but I think the final endpoint of this plan is where we need to be.
Thank you. So do we need to look at this email from you, Greg, about this laying out the funding?
It's obviously up to you. As an exercise for myself, I wanted to get a sense of what sort of impact on taxes and how we might accommodate these projects. And so it's a first cut at a little fine tuning of the timeline that you see on the screen here. Push out a few things, a few years. We tried to match it up with either potential grant funds or when we're retiring existing debt. We need new exclusion, etc. What else has happened in terms of other finances? And what about the elementary school project? Is likely on the horizon in the district. How would that fit in this as well? So I start off with few relatively easy ones, all it deals, but senior center potentially a combination of fund balance and private fundraising.
What impact does the new development with respect to the community center impact this? So, social media is blowing up because Harbor Point is not renewing the lease for the community center. How does that impact our needs as a community for a center which could work both for everyone in the community as well as the seniors?
So it offers a possibility. So that maybe could change some. The challenge with the existing community center building is it's too small to serve all the needs. But if you could expand that building, either by adding a full second floor and or then it certainly has the potential.
But we can't if we don't have lease for the land.
For leaving that door,
Oh, okay.
see, but
But what about the lease, the land lease?
turns out
I'm hearing that Harbor Point has refused to extend the lease.
they are willing to provide a different lease to a different entity.
Okay,
The town.
Yes.
okay.
Sounds expensive.
They have indicated they will be willing to lease some of it to the town. But we then could sublease some of it, have an arrangement with
To anybody else who wants.
the community center Inc. to continue their operations.
Sorry, then who right now has the lease on the land?
It's the community center Inc.
Okay, so. The senior center,
I just found the rumors. The town did not initiate this. This is something that I don't want to have the town be playing for a community center Inc. being evicted. We are very willing to work with them. It can be win-win. Deal. Harbor Point Association is the one who initiated it.
yeah, that's the message.
That's out there.
So.
They want the town to take it by eminent domain.
You don't need to.
I guess it doesn't matter, but it just seems weird. Why do they care who has the lease? It's community, blah, 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 Inc. and that, like,
The short answer is that they want more utilization of that space. Something that is going to use it more frequently. So if we combine with them, then that will give them more frequent use. So what this sort of game plan, the big new expense that would be the DPW garage. The assumption is that you get at least a good chunk of money through grants and litigation funds, assuming that settlements are reached with the manufacturers of the PFAS. In addition to some bonding through the water, through the enterprise fund to handle the cost of the PFAS expenses. We have the new elementary school in next, mostly covered by the new tax revenue from CST project, so that is fully online and paying taxes. So by the end of this decade. And then again in the 30s, early 30s, moving forward with the potential public safety complex and compound renovations, and being funded dollars that are freed up and no longer needing to freed up because our pensions and our open liability. As well as high school that we fully retired as well. So, I just tried in my mind to project ahead and say, is there a path forward that allows us to do a lot of these projects without constantly going for more debt exclusions and higher taxes? And
Seems like you-
pleasantly surprised that it comes together fairly well, obviously not perfectly. In the scheme of things, I was pleased that we have some options of dollars being freed up, et cetera, or new revenues coming in that will allow us to pursue some of these projects. So I was encouraged by it because when I first see, we need to spend $100 million in the next 10 years, that feels really daunting. For the time it gets. But when we sit down and think through the timing and what is happening, it becomes more feasible.
Question, I just, CST, I thought our ballpark numbers were maybe 1.5. Checking more than that, so I was thinking,
It could be easier on that high end.
because, 6 Elementary, if it's to the tune of, say, 40, which is a smaller building but less, and we're 2/3 of it, and it's a 20-year note. How much is that? Yeah, it's $2 million a year.
Yeah, it's closer to 2 million. Yeah, so
So I think there needs to be more on that line. It's not just a CST.
right, it's not 100%.
Yeah, it helps, but it's not the whole nut.
Also, it might be, I was under the impression that would go before 29.
I think it will.
Yeah, it's gonna go up.
Oh, you mean the school project?
Yes.
No,
Not by the time the bonds or payments are being done.
Oh, I have to get accepted by the state.
That's gonna be accepted by the state.
Okay, because it
And
sounded
go
like it
through a
was.
couple of year design process.
Just for reference, now, I know you know the answer to this, A to Z. In terms of time, better for this one, you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
From the day it was like, go, till when kids were walking in the door.
4 to 5 years.
It was a good 5 years.
Okay.
But the bonding was early. And actually, because of the market, we made quite a bit of money on it. That's right. It might have been a little aggressive, but the rates were really good, so it was a good time to jump in.
right,
I mean, basically, we made almost 900,000 early on by sitting on that, before it actually started going out to contractors, so.
Yeah, because rates were low.
Yeah, right, the timing was actually pretty good.
So, yeah, this is real rough.
Yeah.
But I felt it was
Yeah, no, it's good to
an
think about.
important exercise just to get a sense of what are the possibilities and are we really spitting in the wind or is there some possibilities here?
Is the rotunda already funded? That it's not on the
Rotunda-
list?
We are pretty optimistic it'll be grant funded.
In what timeframe?
soon.
Rotunda. If all things went well, we would be in the construction next one, not this one, but the year from now.
A year away.
The rotunda.
This is probably a really dumb question, but senior center and a COA building, are those two different
Same
things? It's the same thing.
Good question.
Then, now I'm actually confused then. So if potentially, we move all these buildings around and the COA/senior center is gonna go where the fire station is now, right? Then that's like a down the road kind of thing? Is that fair? Like way down the road. So, but here,
I'm showing a different path. So it'd be a different building. It would not be the fire station.
We're not privy, when we were doing this report, we're not privy to discussions with the community center or, the other ones either.
Right,
So
just
this
like
is
facilities.
assuming that none of those,
Just about last week, so that's brand new.
Yeah.
what, sorry, what just?
The community center.
Yeah, no.
That-
No, but I get that we're talking all theoretical and hypothetical and far down the road, but I'm just saying. this senior center here makes it seems like it's a near-term thing. Is that fair?
Yes.
Whereas in that other
So if
stuff,
they,
it was a
if
far,
they
you
did
know,
it near term, they wouldn't use the fire station for C.
clearly, I'm just saying, like, obviously,
Two different,
they're two very different paths.
Right.
So what governs the decision on that?
well, ultimately the voters will.
I'm just not convinced, I just struggle of whether it's just a small section of local people who are pushing for it, or whether it's a large percentage of the town. I just think it's a small, I mean, I know
And
Nancy Hammond has been pushing for it, but
There's a- She is backed up by a strong contingent of voters in town, now whether or not,
loud voters.
you know.
I
whether
noticed a lot
that's
of,
A majority enough to carry it through. We won't know until we take the vote.
there's a good amount of elderly people in the library when I'm there.
But it doesn't mean they would use,
Senior center is
senior center.
close to the library.
I take your point that the voters have the ultimate say, I get that clearly, but I'm just saying for planning purposes, I'm just trying to get my head straight on.
Why,
Do I think about moving the DPW and the fire station and the police station, and when the dust settles, there's gonna be a senior center where the fire station is? Or is it like, no, in like a year and a half from now, there's gonna be a senior center
I think
somewhere else, like,
my prediction is that this is, my prediction of it is that the senior center question will be settled prior to all of these dominoes falling.
Okay.
But I'll be wrong.
senior center, near term,
I think the senior center-
probabilistically, and there's an empty lot with a fire station.
but use it for affordable housing. Affordable house, the MHA was looking for the Pleasant Street site.
If you told me it was another 5 mil, now I'm
But
fine with
maybe
an
that's
empty
the
lot.
library.
What? Oh,
Maybe that's the library.
A suitable use would be
I'm convinced this will be, should be done. I suspect it'll be. This
okay, let's, are we ready to move off of facilities?
Oh, yes.
We got half an hour left. Check ready.
I know. So the next item,
Stuff, you know?
the next item on the agenda was the OPEB actuarial evaluation report, which I sent out. And I don't know if we want to spend any time on it or wait.
I looked at it, I struggle because the format's slightly different, but how much was it recommended we put in that sheet?
I agree.
I
It
went
doesn't,
all over, looked over, where's the next, thanks, John.
it's not in it anymore.
It's normally been in there and
He used to show us the,
if you
The
donate this and
contributions
this
for
and
the
this,
next
what's
one.
the end point?
from years, and I just don't see it in here either.
What we're saying, Greg, is that OPEB report in the past has shown if you donate at this, one, you contribute at this level,
Yes.
you're done by here, by here, by here.
Yes.
And I looked at the new
That's
format,
not
I
here.
couldn't figure that out,
No,
but that would be
Yes,
helpful.
I did not.
Okay. yeah,
And my question is, are the assumptions changed at all for you all who have seen this
No.
report over the years? The assumptions haven't changed at all, have they?
No.
Okay.
the only thing he's required to do is we're using 7.5%, so he's required to show us what would happen if we used
Yes.
6.5.
I didn't know if there were other
Yeah,
percentages in
no.
other years.
But the other thing we discussed quite some time ago was how much would it cost us to fully fund it now?
Yes.
And that number is $3,079,118. It's not a 340. But you know, one of the thoughts I had, and it's not for decision tonight, just for people to think about is at a prior meeting, we kind of talked about maybe reducing stabilization by like 800,000. And I wondered if there would be an argument to use that 800,000 and put into OPEB because we get higher returns.
Yep.
I don't, so that's,
What's that?
You wanna think about it?
Nope.
And I mean, you could go before the
call that a
voters and
no-brainer.
and you could probably get your 2/3 vote pretty easily by saying this is a huge money saver.
right,
You know, it's got a built-in logic to it.
it wouldn't pay it off immediately, but it certainly would knock quite a few years off.
It's a good middle of the road, right?
Right,
Versus going 3.1 mil, right?
Yeah.
Versus just chugging along at 200-300 grand, it's kind of a nice, middle of the road.
okay. So our plan is to do capital budget, the last meeting in October and the first meeting in November, 2 meetings. And so my question is what additional information do we need with respect to that capital budget? Is there stuff we want the town to be working on with respect to a capital budget? I mean, above, in advance of, you know, what do we want regarding capital items?
I would say it would be great to hear from eventually our new fire chief
Right.
about his thought and direction on rolling stock and equipment capital, because
Okay.
that's something I'm sure we're gonna start working away on this year, and next year. And don't, so getting some feedback on that early.
Okay.
And have we concluded that the process will change with respect to the review of committed but unspent funds? Will-
Yes,
And will that be part of the process at the end of October and
yep,
November?
we can do that. And I think the other thing we talked about is we wanted a 5-year history on the annual allocations that we keep doing as to what was allocated and what was spent year by year.
Right, we also talked about organizing it, so see by fiscal year, yeah.
Anything else? Greg, do you have any financial updates for us?
Actually working. with the groups.
I don't know how far you are on the November warrant, but are there any possible financial articles on that? Okay. Do we have a staffing?
Talking about it, Monday,
Okay, okay.
so
I didn't know if we needed staffing for money for that last contract that you said.
that's one possibility, yes.
Okay, okay.
Could wait until.
Yeah. Okay.
It'd be nice to get that out of the way.
Do you have a sense of when that November meeting is likely to be?
13th is the most likely, November 13th is likely to say that. Well, there is a question mark as to whether or not there will be one.
Oh, okay, I wondered if it was certain or not.
No, it's not.
No.
It's become a little less certain because the planning board has decided not to advance the zoning articles.
I jump back one on a sec.
Yep.
Financials. So I get that the auditors have not signed off, but on the other hand, we are what, 2.5 months after the end of the fiscal year? So I mean, I get we don't have the final blessing stamp of approval, but we gotta know.
Yeah, the numbers we gave you a little while ago.
I think you might not have been here at the
Yes.
meeting, Mike, when he talked about, I think, adding 1.5 million to reserves.
That's right.
Part of it was FEMA money. A part was,
How much was FEMA?
The receipts,
That's what, I mean, you know what I want. I wanna know where do we come in receipts and where do we come in
the
expenses?
local receipts were surprisingly higher than we've ever seen.
To the tune of,
It was 3
normally local receipts, I think of 2.8 to 3 million, right? And you're saying it came in like 3.7 or something?
No, not that high. It was like 3 or 3.4.
so Andrea normally gives us a quarterly report.
Yes.
We haven't seen it for June yet. So can she give us that quarterly report for our next meeting? Yeah, we didn't get anything.
I mean, I just
She
wanna
was
know,
too busy closing the books, I
Yeah.
think, so we didn't want to bug her. But if we can have that for the next meeting, then that will
yeah, I mean, leaving aside
answer.
unique FEMA one-off stuff, I just wanna know.
Yeah.
Revenue came in X dollars.
Yeah, no, we did do that, I guess, I forgot. But, you know,
Yeah.
we did- I
Okay,
think it's yours.
okay,
Yeah, I have 21.
okay.
But as is normal, came in the good way.
Yes.
Next is liaisons updates. I'm gonna save school for last. Andy, do you have any update on the DPW?
Just
Okay. Mike, do you have any update on the police?
I do not.
Okay. Tom, do you have any update on the fire?
Not really, he's doing a great job with those regular reports. So
Yeah.
I think pretty much everything's in that. I had coffee with him on September 11th before their ceremony. And we have plans to have monthly meetings.
Good, okay.
By the way, the sign up by exit.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Firefighters.
Yeah, because
Well,
Exactly.
there is a little color to that I could add, I suppose. A lot of the applications have been picked up,
oh, good.
but the chief says nothing's coming back. And
Oh.
he suspects that it's looking at the hours that are required. So when people see what,
It's a little sober.
And
yeah,
what kind of hours are those?
Yeah.
I mean, so roughly,
there's 2 days,
The chief is on, if you wanna ask.
Chief McNeely, could you tell us answer that question for us?
Sure. The requirements for the call firefighters, 2 evenings a week and a Saturday for the better part of 5, almost 6 months to get their firefighter 1-2 certification. So since I've talked to Tom, we actually had 3 applications come back, all of which were Gloucester residents down towards the second Rotary and passed. So those are things we have to evaluate as well, but they are starting to trickle in. Our goal is to do the outpouring for call firefighters through the month of September, and then October 1st, meet with Greg, you and the select board to kind of come up with a plan of attack with, some good information.
Fantastic. We appreciate you making the effort. Okay, and are you a liaison to anything, Peter?
yes, the Harper.
That's what I thought.
And I don't have anything
Okay.
right now.
Gail asked me and I said, I think Peter is Herbert.
Yes.
I'm not
Yes, yes.
100% sure.
I am on the CPC and we had a meeting in August. And we talked about the Causeway Brook restoration area. And the budget came in like double what they asked for. So they were looking, but it's to improve that area, the grassy area under the pedestrian bridge between the 2 schools. That kind of wasteland.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So that's what they're cost. That was the focus of the meeting.
Okay, school district. Maury.
Sarah and I and Greg throw the cannonball over the wall.
So I would say as a preface, Sarah, Greg and I have sat in on a number of meetings on this, so you two chime in. But we began probably 3 or 4 weeks ago with a fair amount of discussion from Essex regarding the whole process, whether these collaborative meetings should be taking place, the value of them. And I think the consensus around the group is they're very valuable and they're important. School committee, I think, is maybe slightly ruffled that they're not understanding what's talked about sometimes. So there's been a real uptick in the reporting effort. And so essentially at the end of these meetings, and there've been 2 of them to date, the chairman of the school committee, Teresa Whitman, is putting together a full report, sending it out to all of the people present. We are basically trying to approve it now within 3 days, and then it gets distributed to the various boards. And the various boards are really 5 entities here. So it's the select boards of Manchester and Essex, the finance committees of Manchester and Essex, and the school committee. So those are the 5 groups.
And I think they're asking for the boards to acknowledge receipt of the summaries and raise any concerns they may have. And I think I distributed the first one too, though. Okay,
So from there, there is a concern about how we roll into the current year, establishing the budget for the school or the school establishes its own budget, and how the towns rally around and try to queue up and pay for it. And there's been a lot of discussion coming out of Essex about sort of willingness and ability to pay. There's been discussion coming out of Manchester about quality of school system that the town is looking for. And that's sort of queuing up to a bit of a divide. And I guess the question is, how do we all collectively work over that divide in the coming months? So there's been a thought about putting together 2 meetings, which are called super board meetings, if I get that correctly.
all board, I think
All
it's now
board.
called all board.
All board meetings, which are essentially sit-down discussion with those 4 or 5 entities we just mentioned. So school committee, selectmen from Manchester, selectmen from Essex, or select boards from those towns, and finance committees from both those. And this meeting is scheduled to happen on the 19th of this month,
Next week, Tuesday.
which is coming up, in the cafeteria at the high school. And it will be open to the public to view, but not for comment. And it is a public meeting, but it's essentially all those boards sitting around talking about the budget process for this coming year. And I think it's an opportunity, as it's been queued up, for the school committee to present their sort of lay of the land or issues. And then Greg to talk about the lay of the land and issues for Manchester, and then Greg's counterpart Brendan Zabricki to do the same for Essex. And then it's essentially, the meeting is planned to go around to the different groups, so select bodies of both towns, finance committees of both towns, and the school committee for comments, questions, and whatever. Given the length of where that all could go, they're trying to limit that to 10 minutes per group. And
So they're looking, so there would be a spokesman for each group. And then subsequent to that, individual people can ask questions or raise things with a limit of 2 minutes per person based on what they've heard from others. So in order to come up with our report, we need some answers to a number of questions. Right?
Is this the modeling, next several years of budget that fits Essex's criteria?
I think this is opening conversations so they know in what direction they should head.
I think they get a sense of the gap.
I think Pam is going to give a sense of what the impact is for 3 different scenarios.
And the basic sense, if I understand, Greg, which you wrote, is Essex view that 2.5 is their functional level they're prepared to work with. The schools probably, or maybe over that number. And then the question is, how do you work with that? Essentially by constraining Manchester's ability to look for a budget that's more than 2.5. I mean, is that the context of what we're talking
Yeah, but what I want to do is to go through these specifics
about? Okay.
so that we respond to where we stand on them. And then that will help lay the basis for what they need to consider in building the budget.
But that's the.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a constraint against.
Well, they're
this
not,
gap.
well, yeah, Essex is reluctant to raise enough taxes to pay the school
Yeah.
operating budget that the school feels they need to maintain the services.
And we're reluctant to go to super town meetings.
Well, let's not get there.
so
Okay.
maybe just, but numerically, the school would like to operate at a level of 3.5% increase. And when you run that through the apportionment, which is based on various factors, we've talked about this before, it ends up being an increase for Essex that's higher than 3.5%, and for Manchester that is lower than 3.5%.
Because of the changing population.
So,
Population enrollment and equalizer value. Yeah. And so that's part of the lay of the land. And then the other part is Essex constraint and saying, we really don't want to pay more than 2.5%. And so when you
which
just kind
is
of,
a school budget of less than 2.
when you back that through the equation, it means that the school is operating at a level of less than 2.5%. And Manchester's contribution is even less, but it also is changing what the school is and does and all that. And that's where voters of Manchester might look at things different than voters of Essex, or school voters might look at things different. It's complicated, so.
To keep my head on straight, like, I get that there's so many inputs and moving pieces, apportionment, students, right? But I have to start with like a simplistic model that will never be the reality, but like, the population of the two towns stays the same, the number of students stays the same, like, right, just start there. And if you go with that kind of a model, and the school district says, we need 3.5% a year for our budget, just to, right? Then the translation should be 3.5% for both towns, right? Just logically, right? Like, that's the math, okay. And so then you get to, well, Essex says, yeah, but I only wanna go 2.5, right? I don't wanna go 3.5. Okay, fair enough, but then let's just say that ended up being the case, that it was, because Essex said 2.5, we said 2.5, then the school district gets 2.5, right? I mean,
Yeah, but based on the apportionment formula, it doesn't work that way. We don't pay the same amount, increase each year.
No, I know, but I'm just saying you gotta start somewhere, and so you gotta start with like a steady state model. You can then,
Everything stayed the
you
same.
you can then tweak it, obviously, you
Right.
can tweak it if more Essex students, more Manchester, Anyway, so, okay.
So let's go through some of these items. Okay, and the first item on the list, because Andy's only gonna give me 8 minutes. The first item on the list is cuts in the district budget. And the extent to which we feel we could support reductions in the district budget. I mean, do we want level services? Do we want reduction in services?
I don't want our voters to not have the choice. I don't want to give them, it must be static spending. Because I think that's underlying your question. Voters are gonna call this shot. And if I understand your point, it's that if we say, well, you can't go over 2.5, and the school wants to go over 2.5, we're taking away a choice, or at least we're trying to take away a choice from voters. And I don't want to be in that position.
So are we saying we feel we want to maintain current services provided by the school?
I mean, high level, yes, but the problem is, it's such a
Okay.
generic, right, level services.
Right.
Could you articulate that in like 2 minutes, right, like?
So historically, but in recent, votes to support that program, at least in Manchester, the voters have said yes.
But my point is just, am I okay with a budget cut? And I would say, well, maybe, it depends, right? It depends on exactly what cut you're talking about,
This
right?
is- This is just trying to set a table to give
This
to
is more high
the
level.
temperature of each town.
So maybe
I
we
mean, I
don't
get
think of
your
this
point, but
money.
then the problem is like,
No, I
I
understand.
can't answer it. I can't, it's not a black and white question, like, do I want a budget cut just because of, no, but maybe it would be okay because, like,
So another way to try to answer the question is, do you want to strive to maintain the same quality of education you currently? That's a different way to answer the question.
Yeah.
And if the answer, so is the answer yes or no? That's a fundamental question. I'm gonna presume that most of you around the table are gonna say yes.
I'm gonna say.
yeah, I can be okay with that, and that fits with my model where a budget cut might still be okay
Yeah.
and tick that
Yeah.
box because of declining enrollment, you're
Correct.
trying to maintain a certain number of kids, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
fair enough.
Okay.
But that's a fundamental question, I think. But if you are strong on that, that's important to convey.
I think another way to look at that question is Manchester in favor of degrading or reducing the quality of the school system? It's the same answer, but it's looked at it from a different perspective. Do we want to live here and we are very uncomfortable about going down in quality of service?
So we'll strive to maintain the same quality of education.
Because I think it supports house values and it supports the attractiveness of the community, yeah. It's where the community wants to be.
Okay. The next is town cuts budget restructuring. So,
Say that again, please, I didn't hear you.
town cuts budget restructuring, so what this was going at is should the towns consider reining in some of their town expenses to somewhat less than 2.5, so they could be able to afford the school budget, and Manchester's done that
I was gonna say,
historically.
we've done that.
Right,
Yeah.
and one of the,
Historically have done,
yeah,
I mean, both towns. Most communities.
So it's constraining communities' non-school spending so as to enable schools to spend at a higher level than 2.5.
right, Yeah.
So why, I'm just,
No, I see the
why,
balance, I just want to be sure the point is clear.
why is it so much harder for Essex? Like, I mean, you know,
they're putting their
half
feet,
of our town budget is the school budget, right? But I looked at Essex and they're about the same, right? So, okay, so
they are less. We're 60%, including the Northeast Regional looked at, 60%.
And what would they be?
And they thought they were 43 at one point, yeah.
Yes.
okay, well, I was gonna say we're both 50, but that makes my argument even harder to wrap my head around, right? If they're 43% of total town budget and we're, let's say, somewhere between 50 and 60, wherever that is, then the school stuff should be actually much
Well,
harder
they-
for us, right? Like, cause
they
it's a
may-
bigger,
They've made different choices. They had a large pool of money for selling the Canoma Point properties, which they had predominantly used up. They also recently built a brand new public safety building, which cost money. And to some extent, I'm not sure how well last year the operating budget for the schools was sold to the taxpayers. There was a lot of divisiveness of,
no, I take all those points, but I
The
still,
biggest difference in dollars, in terms of new revenues, is they have. They have very little.
right,
So we take in, so new growth for us is an extra 250,000.
this is under.
And theirs is under.
fair enough, but again, if you're telling me 60% of our pie is the school district and 43% of their pie is the school district, and I increase by 3.5%. They're 43%, and then I increase our 60% by 3.5%. Right out of the gate, like, they should be,
So part
In
of the
better
purpose,
investment.
yeah,
That's
part
why
of the
we-
purpose of the meeting is to have them explain to all of us
but am I thinking about that right?
what the challenge is.
The way the numbers.
Something's not adding up, even considering your new growth, I mean, come on, 100 to 200, like, that doesn't reconcile that difference I just came up with.
But I also think that it's important, at least for me, when I think of these things, we talk about, their firehouse and, the elementary school that's coming. Those are, those do in our taxes for a number of years, but they are debt exclusions. They're not permanent back to taxes.
Yeah, but
They're not.
But for a taxpayer, you're still paying the taxes.
I get you.
I
but
mean-
it's- But you're getting a capital asset in return.
They're already having to do repairs on it because it's failing.
Yeah.
I mean,
We need to talk about operating. That's.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
I think one of the things that might come out is that the viewpoint on operating is different in taxpayers' mind than the view on capital.
Essex is very eager to spend for capital, is what they've
Their
told us.
Taste for
They like
capital
their
is different
buildings.
than their taste for operating.
That's fire.
But I just, assuming the numbers we just ran through are correct, I just love to throw it out there and say, okay, so every year on 60% of our total town budget, we get a 3.5% hike from the school district. And on 43% of your total town budget, you get a 3.5% hike. Like, we should be,
And they're gonna
complaining-
argue,
we should be.
yeah, they're gonna argue because of the apportionment formula. Their hike is much more than 3.5%, and ours is much less.
But it has been, but we were on, you know, as Greg,
Yeah,
you know,
that-
we were on the other side of that coin.
And we lived on that side of the fence for a
Right,
long time.
that's
That's gonna change.
That's you have to smooth that, you have to draw a straight line through the roller coaster wave curve.
Right, the bigger,
Point is about the 3.5, and you're sort of simplistic.
Right. You have to start somewhere, you gotta take a steady state and knowing that, yes, the reality is gonna do this, but you know, over the long term. I'm sure if we looked at it over the long term, like you said, I'm sure you know, if some years this, you know.
So if you tie the dots together, if the quality of the program is something that wants to be maintained, the next step is that roughly 85% of their operating costs are labor. And when you look at that labor cost, and you think about COLAs and all of that increasing, it's you trim that budget by removing people. And when you remove people, you remove services. And one of the things that I've come to appreciate over time is that operating a commercial business, you can remove people and change things around very easily. When you're looking at a matrix of teachers and grades and students and all that, it is not as easy to have a third of the person here work 3/4 of the time there, move this person and move that person. So there's like some fixed
I agree
thresholds
100%
that
that
happen
It's
here.
not an easy task, and I
Yeah.
would not in my worst nightmare ever wanna be responsible for doing that matrix of
Yeah.
the teacher. But just, you have to agree, at a super high level, if school enrollment is doing this, which it has. Just logically, you need less teachers just to maintain a classroom, you know, a student to teacher ratio, right? I get it's not easy because, right, it's, you need an English teacher, not a math teacher, you know, I get it, and then. Because of the union, you got great seniority and retirement, I get that it's not easy, but just at a super high level, if school enrollment is doing this, which it has drastically. You just logically need less right, like, and I get it's not gonna be linear,
No,
I
it's
get it's
true.
not gonna be linear, but like,
I
you know.
think that's how they've sort of finagled. these
Yeah.
numbers.
Well, that's right, that's what we saw in the first 6 months of this year, right?
Yes.
But I felt like
From 2 classes to 1, the class size has gone up, you know, there've been those kind of impacts.
the irony I felt about the first 6 months of this year, calendar year, was like. It was all this fighting and yelling and screaming, but when the dust settled, it was exactly what I thought. Coulda, woulda, should have been the case, which is
Right.
there was some retirement, and given the declining enrollment, it's all good. So it's like,
Yeah.
what the heck? We all like machine gunned each other for 6 months when like it didn't like. Anyways.
Right.
So
I mean, there are a couple things that make that linear model not go all the way down to the intercept point of 0. One of them is we've chosen to have 2 facilities. So we have a Manchester operation and we have an Essex operation. That sounds a little divisive, but we have schools in both places. The other things that I've come to appreciate are the special education and the things that surround that are not, they're not easily divisible all the way down to 0. So those tend to be fixed cost items on a variable cost model here a little bit, but you're right, declining enrollment, and that's a discussion that should come up at this.
And
I-
the question I asked at the collaboration meeting was how many students could Memorial hold? And I was told 385, which wasn't quite enough to house both Essex and Manchester, and I said, is there any more space in Mid High School? And they said no. But then Essex responded, well, we want our own school. Because we need a school in Essex. Because if we went out of the district and we needed to teach our kids, we need a school to teach them in.
thought you'd get there. Because I think that's.
But on the other hand, they said they can't afford to leave the district because of the bonds they have to pay off for the schools.
What if we bought that our new school from them? I mean, why don't we, there's operating this capital. What you really want to give them is more flexibility without constraining our ability to make decisions about the operating budget. Well, let's look at the relationships then. Is there some argument to not have a regional district for the elementary school, or to have the elementary school owned by our one town? I know these are all variables here. And have them tuition in. Is there anything that
They
without
used
changing?
to tuition into
I
Hamilton.
understand that, and I was in Hamilton and Essex, Wenham, when they were members of that, and they were tuitioned in there.
Yeah.
They didn't pay for capital, and that ultimately became the reason the district fell apart. Because I was in the Hamilton side of that equation as a selectman, but I'm just wondering, is there a variable to change some of those pieces? Because I think the chances of changing the formula, I'd feel embarrassed to go to our own voters about that. I can't think why our voter would change the formula.
I'm personally
But we
emphatically
can
against.
change the relationship.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's, I mean, I know you all have been working hard on this, but is there some way to do that? One of the ones you just answered, which is don't build
would-
another
you-
elementary
you-
school in Essex.
You would have to change the apportionment formula if you're gonna do anything.
Well, you can go to a new relationship.
No.
You're-
it's also
You can be
apportionment formula.
tuitioned in as opposed to.
They're not changes the. There are.
Oh, okay, I'm
there
sorry,
are,
yes, that changes the agreement, but it moves it to another set of variables where decision-making in this town isn't constrained. You're trading off because we don't wanna have super town meetings, constraining
Well,
that
let's wait till we
ability to
get
make
to-
decisions.
Okay.
Well, that's what I hear you say.
But there are districts, I know, in Massachusetts, where the elementary schools belong to the towns.
Yeah.
That's,
The high school.
Or the middle.
I grew up in-
Sudbury's.
well, I grew up in Lincoln. I grew up in Lincoln and the elementary schools were in each town.
So Lincoln, Sudbury,
It's just the high school.
correct.
That wasn't a financial
And
decision.
then
was it? That
Sudbury's
was
K through 8, Sudbury and
They
Lincoln
wanted
is
to
K
own
through 8.
elementary for their little kids. No, that was financial.
Probably critically massive.
They had their own school system
I know.
and
Two school committees.
I don't think that there were enough students in either town because
Ah,
and when they created the district, each town had about 6,000 students. Sudbury's now about 18,000 people.
Yes.
But they had about 6,000 people in each town. And I think that they couldn't provide the diversity of the education at the high school level
I see.
without combining, because you need to offer
Right.
more options regarding courses. The elementary is easy. Because you kind of have the same
Right.
thing all the way through, but at high school, you have to start offering a lot less, so they created the district.
The irony is, from a purely financial perspective, it's inefficient, right? Because now you have 3 superintendents, but you could have 1, you have all the assistant super, like you have all this extra added bureaucracy that you really don't need it. So it's like,
But
It's gonna be costly.
the interesting thing is when, with Lincoln and Sudbury was much poorer than Lincoln was. Lincoln was much wealthier. And they created the regional high school system. And now I would say the wealth is probably similar for both towns.
per capita,
Yeah.
but population wise.
It's
Yeah.
fully,
Sudbury is much
Population-wise,
bigger.
now Sudbury's
Yeah.
probably 80%
fully
of the population.
regionalized now.
Yeah. No, just high school.
No, it's
Still-
still,
still
it's still just, LS is just the high school.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying,
Yeah.
it should be noted that, yeah, administratively, bureaucracy, it makes no sense, right? You have all these additional.
But they demand that they have their local school.
Well, I think it's more a legacy thing. I think it's like Sarah, you know what I mean? And no one, now that train is so far to the station that no one's gonna go, you know what we should do? We should just have one district for everything, right? Because it's like, it just keeps you rolling, right? Even though there would be financial sense to do it.
I have a bit of a problem ponying up for the Essex Elementary School if they're holding back on.
That's what I said.
Operation. Yeah.
What is gaining traction.
I think
That's
that
what I
that is a
said.
very fundamental discussion point on the table.
I
Well, from Manchester's perspective, I think it is.
was gonna say the same thing a different way. You gotta pick a lane, right?
Yes.
And either the lane is like tighten the belt and tighten the screws and save money and pennies, or it's the other one. You
Yeah,
can't,
We don't determine.
you can't say, I'm not gonna do the 3.5, but I need a new school.
Yeah.
Like, it's,
I agree.
those are 2 different lanes. Fine.
One of those lanes is this issue of elementary schools and how many of the schools we have, and the others I think how you deal with the operating budget, absolutely.
If you really wanna
Think
tighten
of
it
my-
out, then let's send the Essex kids to the Manchester, you know, but if you want a school, then the 3.5 has to finally, I mean.
Choose.
So I was thinking that the real volatility is in tying it to enrollment, student enrollment versus say, a general population.
No, this is the general population and the enrollment are the populations used for non-instructional
Right.
and enrollment for instructional, and those percentages are the same.
I was gonna say,
That's what I was
they
gonna say.
almost
They are.
exactly the same.
Yeah,
But that's
It's
why I
60
was.
so there's no
60-40.
discrepancy.
It's 60-40.
Right, but if we just keep it based on the population and not the enrollment, then it doesn't really,
No,
it won't be as volatile.
no, they're both changing together. So the enrollment, the percentage of students per population in each town is basically identical.
So it's just the fact that it's swung back and the delta. This past years has.
The enrollment in Manchester is decreasing more rapidly than Essex, and next year, it's not gonna be as bad for them. Because it's a 3-year average,
Right.
and they're dropping off 3 years ago. And that was when the discrepancy was the largest. But I think a lot of it was COVID related. That I think a lot of Manchester, or more Manchester families pulled their kids out of the public school in COVID than Essex did because of the delay in the public schools coming back online.
And I think you had a lot of people entering into the elementary system who said, I don't want my first, second, third grader in a construction site. So
Okay,
they miss that enrollment window opportunity, but this will roll off next year.
right.
So patience is your comment. I mean,
Well, I think it will even, they said it would even it up a little bit.
Yeah, go.
The reason why I'm emphatically against touching the whole meat grinder formula is because when I looked at the data, if you use town population or students.
Yeah.
It should be exactly 60-40, right? On either or both blended, right? But when you add in the property values, asset
Equalized
values,
value.
whatever the thing's called. It swings 4%. So it goes from 60-40 to we get 62, they get 38. So they're getting a little discount there.
Well,
Not big, but it's a little,
they're
it's,
paying between 3,000 and 4,000 less per student.
is that what it is?
yeah, I did that math,
Yeah.
exactly.
I
Yeah.
was just looking at their numbers. 13.
Yeah, you can't do mill, it's just, but
They're,
to Sarah's point, when you take the total dollars that Manchester kicks into the school district and divide by the number of students from Manchester that go to the district, you get $1 per student.
Yeah.
And when you do the same for them, that delta, I thought it was like 2,000 or 3,000, I didn't think it was full, but it's a material.
So.
It's a
our
material
assessments are 3 times higher than theirs are. And is mostly large part due to the large properties on the ocean. That they don't have. The income is our income is about 2.5 times. These are averages because I couldn't find medians.
But to put that a different way, if you did it tuition based, like Essex Tech,
It would cost them more.
that.
Right.
And I
It would cost them
also,
more
I
to
did
do
some
that.
calculations on adjusting the apportionment formula, and it was very difficult to adjust it in a way that it would be.
What it does is it sort of kicks the can down the road
Yeah.
for a year or 2 or 3, and
It
whether
looks
you,
back.
whether you smooth over 5 years or 3 years, or you change equalized value. It all is gonna catch up eventually. It's not hiding everything, it's just delaying it. So,
So is the general consensus, we don't support adjusting the apportionment formula?
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yes.
To me, the footnote with that is if it does get open, I'd advocate taking out the real estate part, because that would actually make it more appropriate, which by the way, would.
I don't
Go
think
ahead.
you're allowed to. I was reading online about that, and some town tried to do that, and the state wouldn't let them.
No, interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting, I didn't realize this.
So that's a fundamental.
yeah,
rule.
somebody tried to do it based on enrollment or do it per capita and the state wouldn't allow it. State has to approve the formulas.
Oh, they do.
They like to assess community wealth some way,
Yeah.
somehow.
Uh-huh.
So,
I think that's a state approval.
yeah,
So the same would be true of any region like LS, like if I look at their.
Is there are there precedents for like their option districts, where they just divorce?
I mean, it's
well,
happened with Essex, right?
Essex left was a regional with Gloucester, I believe,
They
and
were
they,
Gloucester, they were with Hamilton.
Hamilton, they paid tuition.
Hamilton, they were just a contract outfit. They didn't own the buildings. They
They
didn't,
split with Gloucester,
So they were that.
they have a long history here.
yeah,
I didn't know that.
that's what I was told.
I thought that Gloucester just took their students in as choice. Choice.
We had some arrangement with Rockport years ago.
I could be
It
wrong.
ended badly.
And did you use the Rockport High School, is that?
I don't know, they were tuitioning back and forth. Or something.
So is the
That could
purpose
be a
of this
future
meeting in the
reality.
larger sense is just getting people to talk to each other?
Yeah, and for people to understand
Yes.
where the different towns are coming from. To see if there's some happy medium. You know,
I don't see a happy medium, but I do see conversation is.
okay, so one of the other questions is overrides. If we needed to maintain the same quality of education, would we support an override?
Probably would.
But see that,
It's any given year, it's you have to look at it.
agreed, but to me, that's less relevant to this conversation because the fundamental issue is Essex gonna pony up? And because of the formula, even if we say we're willing to pony up, we're willing to do an override, we're willing to pay 3.5. If they aren't right, like they're, like,
But that's what we're trying to do is
That's
assess
where-
the gap, and if Essex comes back and says, no, we won't support an override. Which is what we expect, because last year, the problem is they did an override, but they didn't really support it. So they didn't get the vote.
but I guess I'm just trying to say, like, even if we wanna throw extra money in for kicks and giggles, like. Can't,
Right.
right, like unless.
Well, and that's when we get to the super town meeting. So what happens is we vote on the budgets, and like this past year, Essex didn't support it because they wouldn't approve the override. Then we had another town meeting where the school happened to decrease the budget to a price that Essex could afford, and the budget passed. If the school had kept the budget the way it was, it would have gone to separate town meetings again.
Right.
And if it failed in Essex, it would go to a super town meeting.
Right.
And at the super town meeting,
Right.
all the voters have one vote, and because Manchester is bigger, Manchester would approve the budget.
Yep.
And Essex would be sent a bill, and they would have to reduce their town expenses by that amount to pay the bill, because it would be too late for them to do an override.
Or could
They
they dip,
could try it overriding.
Oh, okay,
or could they dip into reserves if they
Yeah,
had?
yeah.
if they have them.
I think the key is that the state looks very, the state wants towns to meet their educational obligation. So if you have 2 town meetings and 2 votes and nothing works, and you go to the super meeting and the school and the town says by majority, this is what the bill is. Essex would have a hard time negotiating at that point. They have to come up with the money, and the state of Massachusetts would be, they don't look happily on towns saying, we're not gonna pay that. So they would sort of have to
They have no
They
choice.
would be in default.
do, basically.
So if the towns can't agree on a budget, if we want to maintain level services, would we support a super town meeting?
My short answer would be yes,
Final analysis, probably yes,
Sure.
but it's not a very desirable
Right.
analysis.
but I again, I go back, I look at the first 6 months of this calendar year.
Measure of last result.
Right, but then
You lose a relationship. I
It
think.
was awful and there was all this yelling and screaming and pointing, but. It kind of, it worked, like in the sense that the district reduced its budget, I believe, $1 million. Roughly, right? And it took them 3 or 4 different iterations.
They got down to below 3%, it's 2 points.
But to your question, Mike, if that happened again this year and it happened again next year, and you have a bunch of Manchester residents who start to say, you know, the AP classes are gone, I'm taking my kid out. And you start to degrade the school system, at some point,
That's
you
smart.
may end up actually with this town meeting scenario we just talked about, where the school puts together a budget and Manchester says it's not enough.
Yeah.
You're not spending enough, and we're gonna reject this budget because it's too cheap. And then they go through it again and they don't do it, and then and basically Manchester's objecting because the school system is going like this. And we don't feel that they're putting enough into it.
Yeah,
So
no,
it goes
don't-
both ways.
Don't get me wrong, my short answer was yes, right? And certainly if the, you know. It was like, well, the only way to meet the budget that Essex wants is to cut 6 AP program, like that's a different story, but. I guess maybe I'm being naive and Pollyannish, but I'm just saying, to me, the first 6 months of this year could have gone down a lot better. It could have gone down a lot more collaborative, a lot more nice, a lot less nasty, and we still could have achieved.
And that's why we're
Same-
doing this
That's right.
process. There's the purpose
And we
behind
get ahead
this.
of-
Yeah, we're hoping to avoid that.
Again, maybe I'm being naive,
No, no,
I'm just saying, we do
that's
the
the
same thing
purpose
we
of the-
did, but we just do it in a more collaborative, less antagonistic, whatever.
So just as a mild recap to last year. This process kind of began like this last year and was humming along quite nicely. And frankly, we got to December and we thought everybody was on board, and it was somewhere around mid-January, late January, where a contingency in Essex said, no, we are really uncomfortable with this, and we want to look at class size and teacher ratios, and we want to see about the cost of dropping French and on and on and on. And that spiraled into some chaos.
But there's a lot of blame to go around, you know.
Right, but it was all looking pretty darn good.
Yeah.
Up and through the holidays, and then it was kind of like, oh my gosh, this is not working.
Well,
so
it's-
well.
All the reason why hopefully this process will,
The school had
Exactly, pull it
talked
out earlier.
about,
yeah, maybe, or less likely of getting all.
the school had talked for a year about a revenue adjustment. It could result in an override,
Yeah, they were
And Essex
upset that we.
presumably
weren't
didn't
gonna
complain
get an
for a long
override.
time
We were
about it.
contributions. But they said,
Okay,
Okay. We've kind of done,
Enough to go on.
beat this cow down, I think we got our answers.
Yeah.
You got your answers.
could be an interesting evening.
So just, if you have some thoughts. What you'd like to see presented as sort of the global condition of the town of Manchester. In terms of our economic position. I welcome those thoughts, because I need to prepare a 3-4 minute presentation. Which is, is that, yeah, send me an email with particular points you would like to,
Got it.
you know. Say what our levy capacity, excess levy capacity is. Historical increases in town operating. Talk about a long list of capital issues looming large. There's a show the highlights.
You're presenting this, when?
As part of this,
So we have a meeting Tuesday night,
yeah. fine.
yes.
Do we
School
want,
committee, 2 select board.
Yeah.
we wouldn't want to highlight that it's too easy for us to hit the mark on the school budget. Information, it's information, but I'm just thinking about the 4% that we have.
But it's not easy if.
You're
60
saying maybe you should mention the excess levy capacity?
I would focus more on the fact 60, I'm gonna stick with your 60%. 60% of our total town budget is school district, and them is 43.
Yeah, that,
So, like-
that and the looming massive capital projects that we're confronting in coastal town.
Because one of the things I'm trying to say to Essex thinks it's a piece of cake that Manchester's just gonna roll over. spend anything, and I said, no, we have a lot of expenses coming up, you can't assume, and that's when I said, you can't assume Manchester will support a new school if you don't support the operating.
The cost override votes have been.
Yeah.
You know, there's vocal, you know, there's on both sides.
And that's why we work so hard to.
And as you have fewer students in the school system, it may become more difficult. I think we have 721
Yeah, the demographics
total.
are working against the school system. We're aging,
Yes.
aging town. We're losing students and our percent of 55 and over is skyrocket. It's gonna jump dramatically in the next 10 years.
Okay,
That's not necessarily a bad thing in the sense that if the older people stay in town, they're paying property taxes, but
okay.
using.
And
It's just a different amount.
Yeah.
And then the September 27th meeting, we're gonna talk about, you're gonna have the compensation study by then,
Hope so.
and we'll talk about staffing and wanna know if there's any areas that are looking for additional staffing
Yes.
and what that entails.
Do the minutes, that's been 7 minutes.
The June,
Two of them.
yeah, I have changes to the
What-
August ones.
I haven't looked at the ones that are brand new.
Yeah, I have changes.
I looked at the.
September-
6/12.
6/12,
I'm okay with the 6/12.
okay.
Yeah.
So I have a motion to approve the minutes from 6/12.
Good job.
Peter moved second, Andy seconds. All in favor? Mike abstains. Tom, yes, Peter, yes, Lori, yes, Andy, yes, and Sarah, yes. Mike abstains. Motion to adjourn.
Yes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Good, unanimous.
Thank you.
So can everyone make it Tuesday night?
Yes.
You cannot.
Seven.
Okay.
May Tuesday.
Okay, it is going to be recorded.
Preferred.
Where
is Tuesday?
Yeah, there won't be, you won't be able to interact.
It's at the high school cafeteria.
You won't be able to interact on Zoom.
I'm not even sure it's going to be real time on Zoom,
Yeah, I wasn't sure.
but it
just
certainly is
due to
gonna
the size, whether it would be